Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
Andrew Ross Sorkin has another fabulous book on his hands. 1929. I'm holding it up to the YouTube camera. 1929 is the book. He, of course, the award-winning journalist, the New York Times author, the co-anchor of Squawk Box. There, I said it correctly. Andrew doesn't know, but I don't know why I get tongue-tied every time I say it. Squawk Box, Squawk Box, Squawk Box. This is Andrew Ross Sorkin. Andrew, it's great to see you and great to have you here. Congrats on the book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And you know it, but I'll tell your audience, I am one of your biggest fans in the whole wide world.
You're very kind to say that. I really, the feeling's mutual. It really is. I loved Too Big to Fail, and I love this as well. I don't know if you can see my copy, but it's all dog-eared and Sharpied up, which is the way in which I enjoy the books that I really like. So this is narrative nonfiction, and the reason that the book really struck a chord with me is I became personally invested in some of the characters. Jesse Livermore. Tell my audience, who was he, and maybe you'll give us the Cliff's Note version of his life.
So Jesse Livermore was a trader in the 1920s, and in particular was a short seller. So he famously made bets against the market, made a lot of money in the early 20s, actually when the market fell, but then was almost out of business by the time 1929 came around, because the truth is the market between 1928 and 1929 was up by 90%. And so all of his bets against the market were failing quite miserably. But he made a big, big bet in 1929, the fall of 1929, while everybody else lost their shirt. He made about $100 million. That's not inflation adjusted. And he was really one of the Cassandras in the room, saying that things were getting completely overheated. And he was a fascinating character in that he loved to trade. He loved what the markets were about. He had, by the way, a number of different wives and girlfriends and an alcohol problem, and was a bit of an emotional wreck of a human being. He ends up, by the way, losing all of that money he made in 1929, making some of it back in the 30s, and then losing it all again before 1940. When, do you want me to tell the ending, Michael,
yeah, I mean,
no?
I love the exterior of the Sherry Netherland. I'm not sure that I've been in the Sherry Netherland, but it struck me when you really in graphic detail. Yes, explain what happened in 1940. Okay. Having survived the market, made money, then lost money.
Right.
Go ahead.
Having survived the market, made money, lost money, and maybe this just speaks to the emotional challenge of being in these markets in the way that he was so all in emotionally and psychologically at all times. He ends up walking into the Sherry Netherland, which is a hotel on Fifth Avenue, walking into the bar and ultimately into the cloakroom and shooting himself in the right temple.
When he took a seat near the bar, the bartender, Carl Fisher, placed his usual, an old-fashioned, good whiskey, bitters, and a bit of water and ice in front of Livermore without saying a word. Livermore ordered lunch. He ate alone. He comes back. He goes back and ultimately takes his life. The other part of that story that I was so interested in is that on the day of the crash, and one of the things that I've learned from Andrew Ross Sorkin is that it's not as if there was just one day. There were a series of bad days over a period of years. But on the day, he goes home and his wife has a surprise in terms of their abode. Tell that story if you don't mind.
It's an unbelievable story. He gets home. He can't find his wife or children anywhere. He thinks that maybe they've left him. All of their jewelry and all of it, almost as if someone had robbed the house. He walks into the kitchen, talks to one of the people who works at the house and said, "Where is my family? What's happened? Something terrible happened." He ends up going up to what was like a little apartment or room above the garage where his wife and kids were and all of their jewelry. And he says, "What are you doing up here?" And she says, "Well, we saw what happened in the market and we thought that you probably lost everything. And so I had basically taken all the jewels and everything up there." And of course, he looks at her and says, no, this was maybe the best day we've ever had in the stock market.
Unbelievable.
Which is for him. Yeah.
So he takes his own life, but something else that I learned from your book, I had this perception that suicide was rampant in the year of the crash, 1929. The data belies that. It's almost like the summer of the shark. When you really look at the numbers, they tell a different story. Explain.
So odd. We do have this perception there were a lot of suicides, and there were. I don't want to take away from the true headlines, which was there were just it felt at the moment that there were so many suicides, and suicides connected to the crash of 1929. Having said that, if you look at the actual suicide rate in 1929 relative to 1928, for example, there were more suicides in 1928 than 1929. And so you say to yourself that the numbers don't add up, or at least don't suggest that somehow there was meaningfully more. Having said that, they were more spectacular, if you will. So Winston Churchill, who happened to be in New York during this period of time, surprisingly, watched somebody fall out of a window from his room at the Plaza Hotel. You had, a banker a week later shoot himself in the head. There were so many stories like that. And I don't know, Michael, I don't think I've told you this story, and it's not in the book at all. My grandfather, Sidney Sorkin, who's no longer alive, was 11 or 12 years old at the time. And his brother, who was 16, used to be a messenger boy down there and down at the exchange. And he went down there with him in late October, early November, and used to tell us a story as a family about how he watched somebody jump out of a window.
Wow.
And in fact, in his 91 years on planet Earth, my grandfather, Sidney, never bought one share of stock ever since.
For that reason, because of what he witnessed.
For that reason. It was really, I think, for a lot of people, it was almost a generationally scarring moment, that whole period of time. And you're right, it wasn't, one day, one Black Thursday or Monday or Tuesday. It was all of them. And the market ultimately fell about 50% between October and November 13th of that year. Interestingly, by the way, the market actually came back up. It was only down 17% for the year, but because so many people had taken out huge loans, I mean, literally 10 to 1, when the market fell, it wasn't just that the stock market fell, it was that they owed 10 times what they had already lost.
There had been panic in '07. In 1921, the market ended down 33%. And then, as you describe in great detail, what happened in 1929. And 29 was not the worst year for stocks in the decade. I learned from Andrew Ross Sorkin in 1920, the Dow cratered 33%. Andrew, something else that I've learned from your book, 1929, that really, I felt naive when I got to this part of the discussion, and it comes early in the book. If you had said to me, for how long has credit been a thing, I would have said, I don't know, like wampum, when we were like trading as Native Americans. Credit is a relatively recent phenomenon with an interesting backstory that factors into the crash. Explain.
So taking a loan in America, for the most part, and I say for the most part, was really considered a moral sin for most of our history. In fact, proper people just did not take loans. I mean, if you needed a loan, it was a sign of some kind of moral or immoral problem on your own behalf about your own character and personality. It really wasn't until 1919, and it happened as a function of General Motors. General Motors decided they needed to sell more cars. And how are they going to sell more cars? They decided, we're going to try to loan people money so they can afford to buy our cars. And it was that decision and that sort of switch in the mindset of Americans when people started to do that, that really led to really a complete shift in how Americans think about debt and credit for themselves personally and beyond. After General Motors did it, Sears Roebuck started to do it so that you could buy appliances. And after that, the Wall Street guys, of course, caught on and said, oh, goodness, well, now we can lend you money so that you can go buy shares of stock. And that's what happened in the late 1920s that ultimately led in part to the crash, because people were so levered. They had taken out loans that were so big that when things fell, they literally had to not just pay them back with money they didn't have, but therefore started to lose their homes, mortgage their homes, and all sorts of other things.
And everybody was getting in on the action. And the people that these titans of Wall Street that you write about were today's sports celebrities. People knew their names, and they were revered wherever they would go.
Part of it was the media. Time Magazine goes into business 1923, Forbes 1917. All of a sudden, CEOs, I mean, the same way we think of CEOs, Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Jamie Dimon on the cover of magazines today, the sort of celebrity CEO, that emerged for the first time. I was born in the 1920s. And one of the first was a guy named Charlie Mitchell, who they used to call Sunshine Charlie.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
he was really the one who popularized the very idea of loaning people money so they could buy stock.
So you've been asked virtually everything by everybody in connection with this book. I think I have a question that Andrew Ross Sorkin has not yet been asked. Are you ready?
I'm bracing.
These individuals, they built temples to themselves, and many of them survive. And I am a fan. I spend not as much time as you, but I spend a lot of time in Midtown Manhattan, and I love walking around Central Park and just looking at the buildings of that era. Which is your favorite? Have you been in it? What's emblematic of how high things got before came the crash?
Oh, goodness. So the book, by the way, turned out, it was not my intention to be a love letter to New York, because you're right, so much of New York that we live in today was born then. My favorite building, oddly enough, is 230 Park Avenue. 230 Park Avenue is a building that spans the actual avenue. And in fact, as you're going towards Grand Central, if you're going south on Park Avenue, you actually drive right through the building. That was the advance. That was the invention of that moment. And a guy named John Raskob had an office in that building. John Raskob was really the Elon Musk of his time. He was the guy, by the way, who decided, he was running General Motors in 1919 and decided to pursue this loan program for people to buy cars. He ultimately tried to create a mutual fund for Americans. He had this idea that everybody ought to be rich. He gets into politics a little bit like Elon Musk. He ends up, by the way, spending a lot of his own money secretly to undermine the reputation of President Hoover. He ends up building the Empire State Building, and he was a bit of a philosopher king, too. He advocated for the idea of a 5-day work week. We used to all work 6 days a week. The stock market was open on Saturdays, and he had this idea that if we had Saturday and Sunday off, more people would buy cars, they'd buy gardening equipment, new outfits to go to parties and things. And I always thought he was fascinating. Plus, he has 13 kids. So I thought, this is our Elon.
The only people that I know who are fond of Herbert Hoover, Archie Bunker, if you remember, probably a little bit before you, Mr. We could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. Wouldn't need no welfare state. Everybody pulled. And the people at Stanford in the Hoover Institution. So I ask you, Andrew Ross Sorkin, has Hoover received a bad rap all these years?
So I have maybe a more empathetic, I don't know if sympathetic, but empathetic view for Hoover than I think some historians do. I think a lot of the buildup of credit and the problems that we're describing here happened actually because of Coolidge, who was the president prior to Hoover. Hoover only gets the job March 4th, 1929. So he would have only had a couple of months really to jump in front of the train before the crash itself. He also, by the way, tried to do lots of things to try to save the system, including the Reconstruction Corporation, which was effectively an effort to loan money to banks and other things. He did make a whole series of mistakes, one of which was Smoot-Hawley, the tariff program he put in place in 1930. He was so desperate to get farmers to vote for him in 1928 that he promised them he'd put tariffs in place. And of course, we're living with that similar situation today. Global trade dropped 60%. A year in after he put those in place. He tried to raise taxes at the worst time. So he did make mistakes, no question about it. But he definitely, from reading the diaries and the memos and letters and all the materials that I got my hands on, some of which had never been seen before, I sort of left with the idea that he was trying his best in a way that I think he often doesn't get credit for.
It's amazing to me that Winston Churchill was apparently so entranced by what was going on in the marketplace that he wanted to come and see and experience and make money himself. He was here, as you pointed out, on the day of the crash and perhaps witnessed somebody taking their own life at the Plaza Hotel. And then he returns And that's the trip where he's hit by a car. I don't know how you pronounce the name Baruch, but I love
Bernard Baruch.
Bernard Baruch. I love the line in the book. Tell me, Baruch, what is the number of your house? Why is that part of the story?
Because Winston Churchill is supposed to go get a drink at his home. This is now
Surprise,
10 p.m.
surprise.
plus.
Right.
He had not written down where the home was. He thought he had remembered where the home was, and didn't have that number. Of course, drives around almost aimlessly for I think a little over half an hour. Ends up not getting the right house, but getting out of the car nonetheless. And of course, tries to cross the street and gets hit when he crosses the street. It's a pretty unbelievable story to think that Winston Churchill almost died.
And Baruch comes to the hospital, and when Churchill sees him, the first, very Churchillian, the first words out of his house, "Tell me, Baruch, what is the number of your house?" And then he asks him, "How close was I?" Not even close, right? To finding the house.
Not even close.
Andrew,
not even close. Yes.
I'm sensitive to your time. I love the book. I hope you can tell that from my intonation. The book is called 1929. It's Andrew Ross Sorkin. Yes, the man who wrote Too Big to Fail. I'm derelict in my duty if I don't ask you like everybody else has asked you, and is it going to happen again? And you say in the book that what we really need to remember is that people are always going to find ways to believe that the good times can last forever, and they don't.
And they don't. Look, I don't think that it's preordained that, given the market highs that we're at right now, that somehow we're going to have another Great Depression. I do think it is probably somewhat preordained that at some point, this is probably not going to be that surprising, that we probably have to have some kind of correction or something even more than that, just because stocks are at shocking historical highs on a relative basis. And there's a lot of debt in the system right now, in the world of private credit, in the world of margin trading and the like. And so those things concern me. Having said that, I like to believe that we have learned some lessons from 1929, not always about how to prevent a panic or a crash from happening, but what you do in the aftermath. And so I'd like to think that, the Federal Reserve and the political class will know what to do. One of which is to do things that are politically unpopular, including bailouts and flooding the system with money, which is something that happened after 2008 quite successfully, though, of course, the political ramifications were huge.
I thought that the parallels are limited. The thing, and by the way, I know nothing about everything I know about the market. I learned from you and from watching Trading Places 16 times. Okay, that's the extent of my knowledge of what goes on up there on Wall Street. But it seems to me that the great problem, perhaps, that we face today is that you've got valuation in such few hands, and they're all AI related. And if that goes bust, then we're all shit out of luck. Final thought from you?
I think that's unfortunately right. There's a huge amount of concentration. The AI boom is the issue. It's great in certain ways, but a lot of it's being paid for with debt. And when you look at the economics, it's hard to make all of the math make sense. My hope is that somehow it will make sense at some point. But if it doesn't, I think we could have at least a correction.
Here's the highest praise for 1929. The highest praise is I'm in a book club. I'm in a book club myself beyond all the work that I do and reading books for the program. And you are our next release. So that tells my audience what I think of 1929. And I can't thank you enough for being here.
Michael.
Yeah, hope I see you soon.
Thank you enough for having me.
You're nice to say that. Andrew Ross Sorkin, ladies and gentlemen. The book is 1929.